Welcome back to Progressive Soup. My name is David Stevenson. Got Cary Shaw on Luther Weeks with me. And the show's, we were talking about some religious issues last night, some secular issues. And somehow or other, Charles Darwin came up. And I'm trying to figure out, isn't Charles Darwin the guy that put two of each animal on a boat and
You're a good one, Dave. You're the tops. No,
Cary,
actually,
Cary,
that was
enlighten me, please.
well, actually, that was one of the problems when when people started really traveling around the world from Europe, and they discovered that their catalog of plants and animals was so limited. They were encountering incredible varieties that they didn't imagine existed. And what was astounding was that a lot of these varieties seemed to be just suited to the particular environments they were in, and no one could kind of figure out how that happened. And so Darwin, who's recognized now as one of the greatest scientists of all time, put that and a ton of other information together, as well as things that are not related to evolution. And so when we celebrate science and our new understandings of the world, a natural thing to do is to celebrate his birthday. So we started that in Connecticut in 2009, the 200th anniversary of his birth. And every year since then, around February, we hold a Darwin Day dinner. And the next one is going to be the evening of February 11th in Darien, actually. We change the town each time. And if you want to know about that and how to sign up or at least get information on it, that's at DarwinDayCT for Connecticut.org. DarwinDayCT.org.
Excellent.
So, and like I tell you, it's up to your imagination as to what that org stands for. So,
Okay.
so that'd be really cool. We have a professor from Yale who comes and speaks. These are people who are top of the cream of the crop in terms of science, but in their profession they know how to explain it to lay audiences. So I'm going to definitely be at that one.
Okay, that sounds pretty interesting.
I'm going to change the topic a little, if I could, and this has to do with the fact that our secular groups really want things better for everybody. We're not trying to convert anybody, but we want to make sure that we really care about everybody.
So it's an open
And one of
forum.
the aspects of that is good health and good medicine. So when we go to a health provider, whether it's a doctor, a nurse, a hospital, whatever, we expect that our problem is going to be diagnosed. We're going to be told what the basic choices are, the medical choices, and what one they recommend. And we assume we're going to be told about all the medical choices. Well, I received something in the mail the other day, which I'll talk about in a minute. And yes.
Continue. We're good.
Okay.
Good.
So I received something in the mail, and this was from a local hospital that was busy telling me it was called Health Talk. And this Health Talk, full color brochure, multi-pages. Okay. And I opened it up, and I'm going to read to you one of the things it said, and I'm happy to see it. Expectant parents often ask if we're able to respond to any obstetric challenge that might arise during pregnancy, labor, and delivery, said St. Vincent's William Cusick, MD. And I always answer them yes. So that told me St. Vincent says, whatever happens to you is going to be taken care of. And some of you may see the cover of that brochure. So that sounded good, except that I was alerted to maybe look at some of their policies. And so I went to their website. On their website, they listed all the services they did, no exceptions. They listed on their homepage how wonderful they are. They listed a whole bunch of things. But on one of the pages, it had to do with their mission, which I never thought I'd ever have to look at. Way down in the middle, it said this: all facets of healthcare at St. Vincent's, from the stages of conception to natural death, are guided by the ethical and religious directives for Catholic healthcare services set forth by the National Council of Catholic Bishops. Well, I don't adhere personally to the bishops, and a lot of my friends, whether they're Catholic or not, don't necessarily adhere to all the precepts of the bishops. And I was astounded that a hospital that claims it takes care of everything actually doesn't. There's a case of a woman, this is out of state, but I'll tell you in a minute why it applies to Connecticut. The woman was pregnant and was having a spontaneous miscarriage. In other words, through no choice of her own, the pregnancy was not working, and the body expels whatever's there.
Nature at work.
Yeah, nature at work.
Unfortunately, but it happens a lot.
And sometimes, yes, it does. People don't generally talk about it, but it does happen a lot.
My first marriage, we had twins who spontaneously aborted, and we were not given any explanation. Now, keep in mind, this is in a teaching hospital in Gainesville, Florida, where things may not have been as up to date as you might anticipate it. But this is 1976, Shands Teaching Hospital, and first of all, we had heard about what a miscarriage was, but we didn't realize how often they happen. We mourned thinking we were the only people that this ever happened to, and they never explained to us that this happens quite often. And it was a tough thing for Debbie and me at the time. But continue.
Yeah, yeah. And when this happens, you're expecting that when you go to the hospital, it'll give you the best treatment.
Yeah,
and sometimes it happens naturally okay. Other times, it's a big problem. With this woman, she was having enormous pain. It was not completing naturally. She went to the hospital, and the hospital said, go home, let it take care of itself. So she had more pain. It got worse. She went back to the hospital again. They said, take a pain reliever. It happened 3 times, okay? Well, later on, she hadn't been told that the hospital could actually help complete this miscarriage, which would have saved her a lot of pain because she was at risk for excessive bleeding. She was at risk for rupturing her organs. She was at risk for sepsis.
That's exactly what happened to Debbie and me.
Sepsis means that the bacteria get into the whole inner part of your body and can't be controlled, and that can often result in death. So the hospital was sued, as well as the healthcare conglomerate that controls the hospital. And why didn't they tell the person? They said, well, because they adhere to religious directives that the religious leaders say you shouldn't do, you should leave it alone, you shouldn't touch it. Okay, so how does it apply to Connecticut?
And allow a miracle to happen.
This healthcare conglomerate, and it's called Trinity Health, has now bought up 4 hospitals in Connecticut and a nursing home. So it's here.
Yeah.
And the St. Vincent's that I mentioned earlier, that's another out-of-state conglomerate called Ascension Health. And they also bought up a nursing home. And then after they were here, they had one of the hospitals to buy up an independent Connecticut surgery center. So what's happening in Connecticut and throughout the country is there's a massive merger mania happening among healthcare providers.
Yeah.
So you may find that your independent medical practice now belongs to a greater network. Now, if that greater network holds to these religious directives, that means that your doctor now has to abide by them, where he didn't have to previously. So it's kind of a mess.
Does the doctor not have a responsibility first to the patient rather than to his employer?
That's a big question. And certainly, we all know that if we want to keep our jobs, we have to pay attention to what our employer wants.
I understand.
It's hard for most people to be independent. And it's a whole complicated subject. But basically, one would think that there would be a law saying, at least if it's okay for a provider to not perform a service, but if it's a medically appropriate service, at least there should be a law that says the patient should be advised that there's a medical appropriate scientific way to help you, which the policy of the provider is not to provide.
So
that way you can make an independent decision.
So you can choose a different hospital then?
You can choose a different hospital, you can choose whatever. You could also choose, that's exactly what I want. I'm totally, personally in tune with these religious directives and say, I'm going to tell all my buddies to come here because we want to participate.
Yeah.
And so the question is, like, if you're a provider and you think you know better than your patients what's good for them, wouldn't you want to tell them? Why would you keep it a secret?
Yeah, and let them make the decision.
So the question here is, so now I've got Health Talk, which says they do everything, and then I got their mission statement, which is buried and very hard to find, practically no one will see, until they bump up against the problem in their personal life, saying they don't do it. Is one of them true, one of them false?
Well, I think they're fudging the wording, because the front part says whatever problem you got, we'll take care of it. But some of that has to do with, like, God will provide. You know, if it's your time, you're going to go.
Yeah.
And the back says, well, we don't use every procedure that's scientifically available. We just use procedures that we believe in.
We had this discussion with Senator Joe Lieberman back while he was senator, and the question came up about a hospital in Stanford that would not provide abortion services. And Senator Lieberman's explanation of why that was okay was that, well, if you don't like a hospital that doesn't perform abortion services, then go to a different hospital. Your choice, go to a different hospital. But what do you do when the hospital you're at won't give you information about the possibility of doing that? They figure they got you. You're there, you're not going anywhere, and they're going to have their way with you one way or the other.
Well, that's why we have this bill, to resolve some of those things in a reasonable way, so that patients will know what their options are, and you know, not just a sign on page 29 of the website. But they really need to you know, make it clear to the patient that they have other options, and if they'd like assistance in finding another provider, you know, they'll provide that. And that happens all the time. You know, in our area, I'm from Hartford area.
Okay, yep.
Yeah, Hartford Hospital is advertising, you know, how all these hospitals, when they get in trouble, they send their tough patients to Hartford Hospital. Well, it's pretty common. You know, you go to one hospital and they say, oh, you should go to such and such cancer center. Maybe you should go to Sloan Kettering, or I forget the name of the one in Boston, or, you know, or whatever. Hospitals refer people regularly for things that they can't afford to do, or they haven't got the best thing. So it's not a earth-shattering thing. I mean, your general practitioner refers you when they're not up to doing something. So
to a specialist.
We're just saying, if you know, the patients need to know they're not hearing about all the options.
Okay.
So one of the problems that all of us have is when something is not going right in our government, how can we affect it? So what we're trying to do with the Secular Coalition is say, hey, let's focus on the patient, what the patient needs to know. And so we intend to be speaking with the legislature to say, hey, this is a problem that needs a fix. And we have a proposed bill that would fix it. No one has to do anything. It doesn't require extra costs. It just requires that information be shared.
Some guidance from the legislature to hospitals to do what's right in the eyes of the patient, rather than in their own religious view.
Well, they don't even have to personally do what's right in terms of doing the procedure, but they have to at least provide the information publicly, easily to get, where you won't miss it as to what they're not going to do. I have you know, they're not going to, if you're pregnant, the average person would, you know, just like to have some genetic counseling. Find out through ultrasound or something else to find out whether this is something with a congenital defect.
Just a simple amniocentesis.
Well, some religions are totally against it. So so we got to do this, and we encourage everybody to be aware. This is going to be a very, very interesting legislative session.
So it's interesting you brought up Plan B, because that has an interesting history in Connecticut.
Yeah.
And there was a, I don't think the law ever passed, but there was an agreement outside of it that the hospitals would actually do something like a referral and help patients, because it's a situation, maybe somebody's been raped and they're in an emergency room and all that. They're not, they need help in that, and they need help to get help.
Yeah.
And in Illinois, where this bill actually passed, largely based on that story that we shared about that poor woman. But the Catholic Church did not object to that bill being passed, because they recognized that it was the right thing. Okay?
They wouldn't push it, but they wouldn't stand in its way.
But they realized, either because they didn't want the bad publicity, or they saw what they had done and said, well, that really shouldn't happen. That really shouldn't happen. And so they, acquiesced to a bill being passed that had basically the same provisions that we're hoping for in Connecticut. And, we're hoping that maybe something like that doesn't happen to somebody in Connecticut before the law passes. And then maybe we'll prevent it from happening instead. And there are some cases, I think, going on that some things have happened in Connecticut, but we're not aware of anything that bad that's happened yet in Connecticut, and we just hope it doesn't.
Well, our state, Connecticut, where we live, was a state that at one time, and you don't have to go back too many decades, when pharmacies would not sell prophylactics. And that was the Connecticut Supreme Court decision that made pharmacies sell prophylactics when requested, that led to, I'm thinking, Griswold v. Connecticut.
Right.
And Griswold v. Connecticut was the foundation for Roe v. Wade.
Right.
Privacy.
Right. Right. Of course, in that case, that's no credit to Connecticut, because we were so bad that we were the first one criticized for that, because this was sort of a bluest of blue laws.
Yeah, yeah.
Hide the contraceptives behind the counter. Don't mention them. There's no such thing unless somebody really insists on it. That's the kind of thing we're hoping here we can be a little ahead of the curve.
I'd like to just, before the program is over, just to indicate to people what secular means and where they can find more about areas in the state.
Yes, please do.
Basically, I believe in compassion and reason, with the emphasis on compassion. If something happens, if a storm hits my neighbor's house, I'm not believing that it's God punishing the wicked. I'm believing that it's nature, and that it's up to me to be compassionate and help them out. If someone's sick, I'm not believing it's God's punishment. I'm believing that's the way that nature works. Some good things, some bad things, but it's up to us to provide them some sustenance, provide them some care, and get them to a hospital or a doctor. That's my approach. So if you or anyone else or those in the audience think that they believe as I do, my belief is called humanism. You may be a humanist also, and it's that's a simple statement. There are groups throughout the state. We just recently formed a coalition to get the names and information on the different groups in the state. You can go to CTCOR.org. That's CT for Connecticut, COR for Coalition of Reason.org, because it's an organization.
Well, we're obviously, there's some people at adjacent tables that have their own conversations, but they seem to be tuned into what we're talking about.
Cool.
Because I'll agree that these are things that are certainly more interesting probably than what they were talking about, but they all seem to be in agreement with the premise that compassion is universal. No matter where you are politically, no matter where you are religiously, you're compassionate. We're all compassionate. It's part of being a human being. And compassion fits in with every religion, every non-religion. No matter where you are, no matter what you do, you have compassion as part of your humanity. And what I'm hearing from you is that people can come to any of these groups and they're going to find compassion. They may not always find political sameness. They probably won't always find religious sameness, but they'll always find that thread of compassion running through everybody that attends any of these groups that you've talked about. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Luther?
Yep.
Hear that?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. We're not about bashing religion. We're about separating church and state. And, we're about humanism, but we're also about reason and science. So that's why we honor Charles Darwin. That's what we look at, and we believe in rational decision making, not decisions based on faith-based things that can't be backed up by what we see and what we find here on Earth. And we believe that humanity is the solution to humanity's problems.
Well said. Back to the Constitution and what it says. Because that's the doctrine that everybody likes to refer to. Everybody says, well, look it up. Well, if they don't say, look it up, it's in the Bible, they're going to say, look it up, it's in the Constitution.
Yeah.
And what does the Constitution say specifically about this?
Well, the Article 6 in the Constitution, which is very brief, very clear. You just love something that's short and sweet. It says, there shall be no religious test for any office in the United States.
Meaning political office?
Meaning any office, whether it's a commissioner, whether it's election, swearing in, whether it means anything.
Does it apply to private business owners?
No, a private business owner is in business for him or herself.
Okay.
But this particular provision has to do with the test for office. But like the president has to be 35 years old or older.
Yep.
But you cannot.
That's one of the things is you have to.
But then there's the First Amendment. It says the government can't respect the religion, which means it can't favor religion, and it pretty clearly is it can't discredit non-religion or put that in a lower threshold.
So any religion, including lack of formal religion, is
and that's pretty clear from a lot of things the founders said. That's what's been interpreted in the Constitution over and over. So in a sense, it does apply to private businesses. As many of us think maybe the Hobby Lobby decision was incorrectly decided, just like you can run your life, but you can't run your life so you run over somebody else. And you can't use it. You can't use a religion as an excuse for that.
Some of the folks at the next table have a question mark on their face, literally, about Hobby Lobby. What happened in the Hobby Lobby decision? What was questioned and what was decided?
This was, and I'm not a complete expert on everything, but Hobby Lobby wanted to get out of paying for reproductive health under Obamacare, and they said that that they just couldn't pay for it. It was too much for them to have to pay for it because it violated the religion of the owners. Well, corporations are not really should be understood as to have a religion. They're an entity that's not people, but they claim the entity came under the religion of the owners of the company.
Oh, the question of whether corporations are people.
Well, that's part of it, and that's where you'd have to be a better scholar than I am to look at it. But it's the same thing when the person refuses to build a birthday cake for, a couple that's gay. There was all sorts of florists in Rhode Island that wouldn't service some people that wanted to send some flowers to a girl because she was an atheist and had spoken out. That's the kind of thing that shouldn't be allowed in the Constitution. It's always interpreted that way. You don't want to go into a store and they say, well, we can't sell you this because you're not part of our religion, or we can't sell you that book. We claim to be a bookstore, open to everybody, but oh, by the way, we can't sell you that book.
It seems to me like, this is deja vu all over again from me, because it seems like we litigated this in the 1960s. We had people that happened to be black that went up to counters to have lunch And the person behind the lunch counter said no.
Yep.
They didn't say, no, I can't serve you because you're gay. They didn't say, no, I can't serve you because you're an atheist. They had a very clear impression of who the person that they were serving as not being white, and refused to serve them. And we fought this entire, we fought a decade of civil rights legislation, civil rights battles over what seems to me to be exactly a parallel situation.
Well, there's a little difference here maybe. You know, the women fought a big battle for years and years to get the right to vote. And, and we don't have a constitutional amendment that says they're equal. We couldn't pass that. But I think this is something where people that have no religion were always accepted once we had the Constitution, but now it's changing back. You know, this is
a big step backwards.
This is a step backwards. Where with, you know, gay folks, it was something that wasn't really recognized one way or another. And so that's something that's come up differently. They deserve all those rights.
People were forced,
but it's a little different in that regard, too.
People were forced to never alert the world around them that they happen to be gay, because you can't see gayness.
Well, and publicly, if you acknowledge it, then you're subject to all sorts of risks. That's not unlike when you acknowledge that you're an atheist or you don't believe in God, or in some quarters when you say you're Muslim today. You know, you take on a lot of risk for saying that.
That's I thought we had solved that problem. I thought America had come forward and become a better country, and we'd resolved all these issues in the 1960s, that whatever came up, whoever was discriminated against on any basis, whether they were black, whether they were gay, transgender, anything, any new group that came up would be afforded the same constitutional protections as we fought so hard for a decade for black people for. And here we are. Well, we're also going backwards in terms of voting for black people. So, you know, as you say, we're going backwards. Thanks for joining us, Progressive Soup, David Stevenson, Cary Shaw, Luther Weeks. Much more to talk about in future weeks. No pun intended.
Okay.